Hello there. It is a Sunday afternoon and I'm out for a little stroll along the old city wall here. And I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about something that was inspired by an email I received. So he had a couple of things, he wanted me to address if I could. One of them was, things about Korea that I would take back to America, things I would like to see in America from Korea. And he gave me a list of, I think, 3 items as examples. And those are the 3 items I would have said myself. So, there's probably more I could add to it, but I'm not going to do that in this video. I'll save that for a Q&A video later. But it was his first request that prompted this video. He was curious about what it is that keeps me here in Korea. Not why I stayed. Why I stayed, I addressed that in my first Q&A video. He's not asking about that. He's asking what keeps me here. Now that I am here, what is it that keeps me here? What if my wife came up to me today, if she's the reason I stayed, what if she came up to me today and said, honey, what do you think about moving back to the States? Why don't we go to the States? And my response would be, are you out of your mind? So I guess the question is, why would that be my answer? What is it about living in Korea that would make me want to keep on living here even though my wife is pushing for me to move back to the States, which she isn't? I thought that, there must be a list of reasons that I can come up with, but there isn't. There's only one, and it's just because I belong here. Looking back, and I don't know if this is just projection, future me projecting onto past me, but in my memory, I never really felt like I belonged where I grew up as a teenager. Before that, sure, I didn't know any better, but as a teenager, something just didn't feel right, and I couldn't have told you that I feel like I don't belong if you had asked me in the moment. I wouldn't have been able to express it that way or even identify it. It's just something was always off, and I think in hindsight that's probably what it was. But in my first few years in Korea, I started to get this sense that this feels right. But again, I couldn't have told you at the time that I belong here because I was still learning my way around, still digging into the culture and still getting used to all the differences and adapting. But eventually, once I got married and settled more deeply, there's no question I belong here. This is it. This is me here now and onward. I have no plans to go back to the States. I can't imagine living in the States again. Someone left a comment recently that something I had said reminded them of something someone else had said after living here for most of his life. He had said that he didn't know how to be an American anymore, and I totally empathize with that. I think that's what it feels like for me too. I remember this time when I was in limbo, when I was kind of like, I felt like I was between identities. I was American on one hand and I was a Korean resident on the other, and I didn't feel completely like I belonged in either place. But once that period passed, it's settled. It's definite. I belong here, and I know how to be a foreign resident in Korea. I don't know yet how to be a Korean. People joke sometimes that I'm more Korean than American now, and I guess that's probably true, but I'm not Korean yet. So I still got a bit of ways to go before I can say that. Now, right here in front of me is the Sheila Hotel, which is a very nice place, as you can see. And there, just across the way, that's Dongguk University, rising up the hill there. And this park is on the grounds of the Sheila Hotel. I think it's only accessible through the hotel. And you've got this statue of this archer here, defending the property by himself, apparently. Can't really see his face because of the tree. If I were to just make a video about that, well, we'd be done here. Thanks for watching. That led to some other thoughts about, what is it that I like about living here and don't like about living here? What are some of the ups and downs? Several years ago, I knew this guy. I was acquainted with him. He was a friend's coworker, and so we interacted occasionally at, gatherings or, hanging out in a pub somewhere. And I saw him one day when I was on a bus. I was sitting in the back of the bus, and he got on in the front, and he sat down somewhere up front and just was looking straight ahead. And there was a Buddhist monk sitting behind him. Never forget this. He was an older guy, had a very friendly, smiley face. And he leaned forward and he tapped this guy, I'm not going to name him, on the shoulder and said, "Hello." And this guy turned around and gave him the finger. I did not understand that. I don't know what motivated him, what he was thinking. Who can say? I do know that overall his experience here was not positive. He was having a tough time. He was very stressed. A lot of it was because of work. I think some of it was because of personal relationships, other issues. When you've got so much stress going on around you in your life, little things become big things. The little annoyances that every foreigner would experience just from the differences between this culture and their own, they become big. And minor issues become major issues. And all of that adds up, it builds up until you just can't take it anymore. And so he left, he eventually left. I'm not sure exactly how long he was here. It was probably 3 or 4 years. But that is a story that I have seen repeated many, many, many times. As much as I love living here, as positive as my experience has been, there are always people who have had extremely opposite experiences, very negative, and for various reasons. I've actually been very fortunate to have a job that is mostly stress-free for most of the time I've been here. For many years, I worked for an agency. The owner and I became friends. He paid me well. He gave me the choice to take on new sessions. He would send me out to offices just to sit and chat with people for an hour, basically. They call them English lessons, but they're not. It's just talking sessions, chat sessions, practice sessions, basically. If he had a new client, a new contract, he would always contact me first, and he would say, "Hey, Mike, do you have time for this place at this time, this many days a week?" And I'd say yes or no. And if I said yes, then he'd set up an interview. It was great. I worked as much as I wanted or as little as I wanted. Yeah, just no stress. And not everybody is in that kind of position. That really, I mean, I had stressful jobs before that. And so I know that when you have a job that's stressful, it can really, really influence the way you experience your day outside of work. One thing I couldn't escape was attitudes about foreigners, and that has changed and varied over the years. So you go back 30 years ago, when I was still in the Army, my haircut gave me away, you know, that military haircut. And that was a target sometimes for those who appreciated the American military and those who hated us. And there was a good mix of both. The older folks tended to appreciate us. They still remembered the war and thought of that in positive terms. The younger folks tended not to like us very much because of crimes committed by soldiers while they were here, or they could point to, you know, not so good events that happened in the war at the hands of American soldiers. It was a mixed bag back then. Anti-Americanism was a real thing that, you know, we had to deal with. And it wasn't like we were dealing with it all the time, every day, but it was frequent. And, you know, I can remember on more than one occasion, and it's, in hindsight, it's almost like being in a sitcom, right? Where the same exact scenario just keeps happening again and again. Imagine walking down an alley at night after a night of drinking in a, you know, little country village, and you're encountering two guys coming in the other direction. One of them is very drunk, the other one is kind of supporting him, and the very drunk guy sees you and immediately points at you and says, "You." And I don't want to make fun of anybody's pronunciation, right? But that was it. That's the way it was back then. You have this Konglish is what they call it, where the very thick accent, you know, nobody can say an F, they say a P, nobody can say a V, they say a B, you know, because those don't exist in the Korean language. The Konglish was very common back then. It's less common today, but that's what you would get going down this alley and seeing these guys. And so the drunk guy is, you know, saying F you with a P, and his friend is trying to, you know, pull him back and, you know, saying, "Oh, sorry, sorry, sorry," you know, bowing to you and saying sorry and pulling the guy away. That exact scenario, two guys, one drunk, F you with a P, sorry, sorry, happened to me on more than one occasion. And it happened to me in Donggucheon outside Camp Casey. It happened to me here in Seoul. The thing is, that was just part of the environment back then. That was part of the transition that Korea was going through at the time. And anywhere you go in the world, you're going to find that happening when major social changes are happening. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was what was happening back then. By the early 2000s, that anti-Americanism had kind of, I don't know, almost gone away. There were a lot of demonstrations still in the early 90s and through the mid 90s, but by the late 90s, they became less frequent. A few years into the 2000s, the focus shifted from anti-Americanism to anti-English teacher. Oh boy, some young guy had published a PDF on the internet talking about how to pick up Korean women. And that set off a firestorm, and it was all over, you know, there were exposés on news programs, and it was a topic on variety shows, and yeah, it was pretty just very hyperbolic and over the top reaction. Through all of that, through the anti-American stuff, through the English spectrum nonsense, you know, it never really colored my perspective of Korea negatively, because there was so much more to love here. There was so much more to enjoy, so much more that was good. Another major headache over the years has been doing things online. Korea has a national ID card system, and your national ID card is tied to all of your activities. It's tied to your phone, it's tied to, subscriptions you have online. It's just, you need it for a lot of things. Banking, all kinds of stuff. Their numbering system is coded, right? So the first part of the number is your birth date, the year, month, and day. The first digit of the second part of the number is a code indicating if you are a Korean citizen or not, if you're male or female, or if there's a few other things like if you're Korean born before 1920 or something like that. Anyway, there's some different numbers there. So my number, the first digit the second part of my number is 5, because I am a foreign male. Years ago, this caused all kinds of problems because as far as I know, there was no central service to verify an ID card number. So everybody just kind of did their own thing, right? All the websites. I remember working for a small Korean startup for a few months as a programmer, and we had to implement this in the back end. I couldn't understand why we needed to take people's ID card numbers for the service we were setting up, but the answer was people expect it. We had to implement our own verification and processing code to validate the ID card number. And the problem is you had different companies implementing this their own way, and some of them were not implementing it correctly. And so they weren't doing correct validation, meaning they weren't accounting for all the variations of that little first digit of the second part of the number. So it would encounter, some websites, they would encounter the 5 in my ID card number in that second part and give me an error saying it's not a valid ID card number. This was such a problem back then. On the upside, all of that has changed, right? I can't remember the last time I was even thinking about anti-Americanism. The last incident I can remember was several years ago. My wife and I were preparing to move, and we were going to look at an apartment. We met the landlord outside, and when he saw me, he said, "No, I'm not going to rent to any American bastards." So it's like, okay, next place. And that was, gosh, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago. It just doesn't happen anymore, anti-Americanism on that scale that it used to. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure some people don't like us. I've seen it in the comments. I've hidden some comments here that you probably wouldn't want to see. But it just doesn't, it's just not at the scale it used to be. And that whole anti-English teacher thing, that was just a blip in the digital ocean. It was over pretty quickly. The ID card thing, it's centrally verified now, and there's a service that all the websites use, and it's much simpler than it used to be. It was still a bit of a pain even after they implemented the central verification thing. It still requires you to put your name in a certain format, like I have to write it in all caps, and I've got to write, last name, first name, middle name, because that's exactly how it appears on my ID card. If you use lowercase, it won't match. They don't have to modify the system because at the end of the day, the system is set up for Koreans, and the foreign population here is a very small minority. The government could just say, yes, screw it. We don't want to spend the effort on it, but they did. And I think there's still some kinks in it. I haven't had any problems with it in a long time, but there may be an issue. I've heard people complaining about a character limit. People with longer names have problems with it. So that could probably be improved. But the fact that they are putting in the effort, that they have improved it, that's just such a big deal to me. Back in the day, Korea wasn't really a pet-friendly place. And my wife and I love dogs. We've had dogs almost the entirety of our marriage. I used to feel like the attitudes toward pets did not allow for the necessary infrastructure to support pet owners. In the 25 years that my wife and I have been married, that has changed dramatically, both the attitudes and the infrastructure. So I love how pet-friendly Korea has become. The one thing that I think is still missing, it would be nice to have more areas where we could take the leash off and let the dogs run. But it's hard to do in public places because you still have a lot of people who are afraid of dogs. We have this little Maltese, you know. Normally he loves people. He's always very friendly, and he'll just, make a beeline to any person he sees when we take him out for a walk. Now and again, the person he's making a beeline for is terrified. So, we've got to, pull him back. And I don't want to terrify people. I don't want to do that. And so, I'm always trying to be very careful. When I see someone coming, I always look at their face to see if there's any sign of fear when my dog starts moving in their direction, to make sure they're paying attention too. So if they're not paying attention, or if I see that fear coming, then I'm gonna, hold them back. But if I see that, oh, look, it's a cute little doggy expression coming, okay, I'll let them go. Yeah, there are just so many more pet owners now, and we often see people walking dogs and we're out walking ours. And we have a few little places where we can go that nobody goes to, where we can take off their leashes and let them run around. Another thing I love these days is the proliferation of coffee. I am a huge coffee lover. I drink it every day. I used to drink multiple cups in a day. These days I'm down to one, basically, equivalent to a Starbucks venti. But there are so many options, and occasionally I'll get like some kind of like a coconut coffee smoothie or, something like that, one of the specialty drinks. But oh gosh, they're just everywhere, right? The cafes. And I still want to do a video about the history of coffee in Korea. It's a lot of work to get all the research done for it. So it's going to happen much later than I had wanted to make it, but it will happen because I just love coffee. So this isn't the video I had intended to make, but I hope you've gotten something out of it. The next few videos that I'm going to publish after this one will be from my trip in the UK. So I will see you then. Thanks for watching, thanks for liking, thanks for subscribing. Bye-bye.